Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by Senior Associates Kelly Goldthorpe and Peter Salerno. Please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen. We'll do our best to address your questions at the end. And if the panelists do not get to your questions, you can contact them through the information provided on screen now. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to the panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hi, good. Kelly, how are you?
Good, thanks. So I understand you were traveling this week. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience traveling during COVID?
Sure. I was flying within Canada. I just got married a few weeks ago, so we were on our honeymoon. Just traveled out west to Vancouver Island. It was a great trip. Flying within Canada wasn't too bad. No requirement to test before traveling, which was nice. But the airport was pretty quick. Lines weren't too bad, so it was just it was a great trip.
So you don't need to test? Did you have to show that proof of vaccination?
No, not yet. I think we will need to do that coming up. I believe it's November 30, where we're going to have to start doing that. But it was relatively straightforward going through and flying domestic. It was actually a good experience. I was surprised how quickly we got through the airport, both in Victoria and then in Toronto too at Pearson.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of travel, so with the COVID-19 travel requirements and sort of things are rolling back and heading towards normal or pre-COVID or the before times. So the ordering councils were recently released. They expired November 21st, and the new orders and councils were released November 20th. These are going to be valid until January 21st, 2022. So now they're valid for 2 months, which gives some period of stability. And you know, the big change for COVID-19 travel requirements is the requirements to be fully vaccinated in order to fly into Canada for non-essential purposes. And the other big change that's going to be implemented on November 30th is that vaccines are WHO approved vaccines. So in addition to the 4 Health Canada approved vaccines, Canada is also accepting fully vaccinated people who have the Sinopharm vaccination. So any WHO approved vaccine is going to be considered fully vaccinated. And then another big change is the exemptions for quarantine are pretty much going to be going away because of the increased vaccinations. There are no longer going to be very many exemptions for people to come into Canada who are not fully vaccinated. So unless they're working in trucking or critical infrastructure, for example, unvaccinated athletes are no longer going to be able to travel to Canada, or immediate family members who are unvaccinated are no longer going to be able to travel to Canada. So there's going to be this vaccination requirement to be able to enter Canada. So Peter, you mentioned you were in BC. Did you hear about the CBSA announcement about BC?
I did. I think on Tuesday they announced that given the flooding situation, there were widespread floods south of Vancouver on the mainland, as well as on Vancouver Island. CBSA announced that travelers and essential workers who must travel to or through the U.S. for essential reasons are exempt from the COVID-19 testing and quarantine requirements. So these exemptions do not apply to non-essential travel. You can only travel to the U.S. to access their home in Canada, to access necessities such as groceries, fuel, medication. Exemptions do not apply to non-essential travel. For example, in other words, those who go to the U.S. for non-essential purposes like shopping, tourism, family visits. People in these circumstances would still have to comply with all COVID-19 pre-entry requirements.
I think that makes sense given the challenges that the area is facing right now. To remove one complication in travel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just to recap the changes that are taking in effect in November 30th, next week, Tuesday. So a negative test is no longer required if your trip is 72 hours or less. And travelers are required to maintain proof of the 72-hour travel window. And this only applies to Canadian citizens, permanent residents, or people who identify as Aboriginal Indian in Canada. There's, as I mentioned, the expansion of approved vaccines to the WHO approved vaccines, and proof of vaccination will be required for regulated air and rail travel within and outside of Canada. So, Peter, you were lucky you skated that one until next week.
Intentionally.
And, yeah, did you want to talk about the changes that are taking effect in January?
Sure. So we're expecting on January 15, you'd already mentioned it, Kelly, that certain travelers that are currently exempt from the travel restrictions will no longer be exempt unless they are vaccinated. And that change will affect those reuniting with family members, for example, international students, athletes, like you mentioned, Kelly, foreign workers, essential service providers. So the list is extensive, and I think it's just a general push by the government to have more people vaccinated if they are entering Canada.
Okay. Yeah, I think that as vaccination rates increase worldwide, the travel restrictions are going to sort of respond accordingly. So we are heading towards some sort of normal order. Again, it's business as unusual, but we are heading towards more travel and fewer restrictions. So next on our agenda is PR updates. So Peter, do you know anything about the express entry processing backlogs? What's happening? What's going on in express entry?
Yeah, so from my experience, the application submitted for under the Canadian Experience Class Express Entry, even some federal skilled worker applications I've had pending for upwards of 18 months. So there are general backlogs I'm still seeing. In terms of minimum necessary scores for those who are waiting in the express entry pool, we're seeing less frequent CEC draws than we saw even a few months ago, at which point those who were in the pool with scores less than 400 were still receiving invitations to apply for permanent residence. Later on in the year, more recently, we're seeing less draws, and the draws that are occurring, most recently in August, people needed at least 403 CRS score, and then the most recent draw in September, applicants needed at least a score of 462. So the scores are creeping back up to what they were pre-pandemic, and it's unclear when the next draw will be, but there's also no word as to when the next federal skilled worker draw will be held. And I've spoken to many clients who are overseas, and they're eagerly waiting for that, but unfortunately we just don't know when that federal skilled draw will happen.
Yeah, it's amazing that the upward pressure on the CRS scores due to the backlogs, and I recall that the new minister has said that Canada is on track to admit the goal of 401,000 new immigrants this year, and they are still on track to do that with the existing draws and the existing conversions from temporary to permanent. But it's amazing that I noticed as of a couple of weeks ago in the pool there were 186,000 candidates in that express entry pool, and more than 42,000 have scores of between 450 and 500. So that upward pressure in the CRS scores is making that pool very, very competitive. And to relieve that, they're going to have at least 10 draws of more than 4,000 in order to get rid of the 450 and up candidates. So it's going to be interesting how they're going to be able to select these candidates from this really competitive pool.
And at the same time, try to bring down the backlogs and the processing delays. So it's an interesting time, certainly for anyone applying through the express entry system. And I don't even think it's specific to the express entry system. For example, those who have applied for permanent residence as under the family class as spouses or common law partners, we're also seeing really significant delays, and obviously lots of hardship for partners who are not able to reunite here in Canada. For applications submitted for permanent residence under the family class inside Canada, processing times are generally around 12 months, but for those applications submitted outside of Canada, where obviously partners are not together, processing times are typically longer than that, unfortunately. So for me, at least through my practice, I'm seeing processing delays not only with express entry but also with the family class as well.
And it's really, really unfortunate to see this prolonged family separation. And I believe that the new minister had sort of made a promise of being able to issue temporary resident visas to spouses who are being sponsored. So there may be some relief, at least some temporary relief in the upcoming months, and seeing how IRCC is going to interpret this new policy and how it's going to be implemented. But the issue of sort of dual intent of getting a temporary resident visa when there is a permanent resident application in process has been one that, you know, we as immigration lawyers have been aware of for a long time, and the challenges of having to demonstrate dual intent, even though it's a recognized concept in immigration law. Hopefully there will be some relief for these families who are separated through no fault of their own. So I'm hopeful that the announcements of making TRVs available to permanent resident applications will be coming soon by IRCC.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, you know, overcoming the issue of dual intent is extremely challenging for spouses, and I'm really curious to see what the new policy looks like that IRCC releases. I know it will be welcomed by you know, many of our clients eager to get back together. So really happy to see that announcement.
And speaking of family reunification, the parents and grandparents process. So IRCC sent out new invitations to a new batch of sponsors between September 23rd and October 7th. So there were how many invitations? How many new invitations, Peter? Was it 20 to 30,000 new invitations?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. And so they sent out those new invitations, which is great news for family reunification. And sponsors were given 60 days to submit their complete applications. There was a little bit of confusion because there's some inconsistent messaging in the invitation letters, which stated that they had 60 days or until October 7th, which happened to be 67 days, or give or take. So IRCC has clarified that those invitation letters, regardless of the date that the invitation was submitted, was sent, that sponsors have up to December 6th to submit their complete application, even if they received their invitation on September 23rd. So that's some clarification where it's just a baseline December 6th deadline for everybody, not 60 days from the date of receipt of the invitation.
And I think IRCC's objective was to accept, I think it was 30,000 complete applications. And unfortunately, there haven't been any new announcements about the program for 2022. I know lots of people are eager. I think IRCC is aware of how important it is to have programs in place to bring in parents and grandparents. They're aware of the demand, and obviously a lot of people this year who were eager to sponsor parents and grandparents unfortunately didn't get a place in the program. So I think there's widespread interest and hope that the government will release more information about what the program will look like next year. In prior years there was a lottery-based system, first come first serve. So I think everyone's keen to know more details for next year.
Definitely, it's one of the most popular programs that's oversubscribed. A lot of interest and a lot of expectations around that program.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of expectations, how long can you expect to wait to get your PR card after you become a PR?
That's a very popular question. I'm seeing very often. Unfortunately, for people waiting for PR cards, it's hard to give even an approximate answer. I think online it's taking, I can't remember exactly the amount, but for people who have just landed, typically the PR cards are issued much quicker. If someone's applying for a PR card, it's taking at least 4 or 5 months. There's also the issue of decisions being made on PR card renewal applications, and IRCC being unable to release the cards because their offices are still closed. So clients are waiting for decisions on their applications, it seems, but in reality, the cards have been issued, and IRCC has yet to simply issue the call-in notices for the clients to pick up the PR cards at the IRCC office. So it's been incredibly frustrating for a lot of clients as they wait months and months and months. I have some clients waiting 18 plus months and still have yet to receive a PR card, and it's particularly frustrating for clients when they need to travel. Clients who have the need to travel have very few options, one of which would be when they travel, they have to apply for a permanent resident travel card or travel document overseas, or they have to re-enter by land into Canada. So very, very frustrating situation for those waiting for PR cards.
Yeah, and with the upcoming holiday season and increased travel and borders sort of reopening a little bit more, there's more interest in travel, but it's difficult to travel without a valid PR card and how to get back into Canada. So there's a lot of frustration, exactly as you said, especially for people who recently became permanent residents of Canada, waiting for their first PR card. They suddenly became a permanent resident. They were just notified that they became a permanent resident, and now they're unable to travel because their temporary resident documents are no longer valid. For example, their TRV is no longer valid, or their ETA is no longer valid because they're now permanent residents in Canada, waiting on that first permanent resident card, which can take months to obtain. And it's actually all over the board, all over the map in terms of when these PR cards are coming in. So some clients have been waiting since July. Some clients landed in September and have received their card already. So it just sort of is random selection, unbeknownst to us, how people's cards are issued and why some get theirs quickly and some don't. So there's not a lot of follow-up mechanism right now, just due to the backlogs and IRCC's sort of position of we're dealing with a lot right now, especially given the situation in Afghanistan, and we're dealing with Afghanistan, and so we can't get to you. So there's a lot of frustration. So the bottom line is, in this upcoming holiday travel season, if people need to travel, look at your PR card, look at the expiration date. If it's expired, you might need to put your travel plans on hold, or you need to be aware that you need to get either a PR travel document to return to Canada, or you need to return to Canada via the US-Canada land border, if you can even get into the United States. So there's a lot to unpack for PR cards.
And I think what goes, sorry, I was just going to say what I think goes hand in hand with the PR card renewal applications is that we're also seeing pretty extensive delays with citizenship applications as well. So when people are waiting for their citizenship applications to process, which are taking, in my experience, are taking at least 14, 15 months, if not longer, their PR cards are expiring. And so they have to apply for a new PR card, which, as we just said, there are significant delays there. So unfortunately, the backlog seems to be not only specific to PR card renewal applications, but also to the citizenship. And there is, a welcome update was the online tracker system. Clients can see progress of their applications, confirm it is in process, which gives a little bit extra peace of mind to clients. But unfortunately, those backlogs are very prominent and significant for the renewals and the citizenship.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that having a citizenship application in process doesn't mean that somebody does not need a PR card any longer. So a citizenship application doesn't do anything to a PR card. So sometimes people have to renew their PR cards while their citizenship application is in process. So it's important to understand that, a citizenship application doesn't allow you to come back into Canada with an expired PR card. So moving on to other topics, portals. What's going on with the portals? I'm seeing widespread delays and lots of outages and tech issues with the employer portals and with like the representative portals. Do you know what's going on? What's going on with their tech issues?
Yeah, I think IRCC confirmed that in early October there were widespread outages with the portals. I think the explanation was that IRCC's transitioning the way that they document information in their internal systems. So I think that was the reasoning or the context behind those delays. There are still significant delays that we're still seeing as IRCC tries to implement these online portals through a number of different contexts. You have the new temporary resident visa portal for clients to submit the visitor visas. You have the MyCIC, you have the ETA portals, you have the PR portal. So there's definitely a push for IRCC to create these portals, and we are seeing, I think, some growing pains with these portals. So I think just in terms of practical advice, if you are using these portals, to not wait until the last moment to upload things, and to upload things, well in advance, anticipating that there will be delays or there may be tech issues. The government is aware. IRCC has announced that, or has acknowledged the issues that have been plaguing these portals. So it's definitely on their radar, and they're going to try to work on these and resolve these issues as quickly as they can.
I hope so, because the technical issues really affect how applications can be filed, and sometimes there's timing issues involved with expirations of documents and whatnot. So it's really important to be aware that there may be technical issues that prevent an application from being filed in a timely manner. So plan ahead and apply in advance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with respect to all of the delays that we've been talking about, in the past, one way to sort of try to get around a delay is through a process called flag pulling, where somebody who's in Canada does a border run to the United States, turns around and tries to access Canada Border Services Agency and an immigration officer in order to get immigration services. So what have you been seeing with respect to flag pulling?
Well, I think CBSA is still formally discouraging the practice just to alleviate pressure at the borders, but fully vaccinated travelers are able and eligible to flag pull, assuming they meet the other requirements to enter Canada, which is very important. Not everyone can flag pull, but certainly it is offering some relief for people who don't want to wait months to have their application processed at a visa office overseas to go to the border. I personally haven't had an enormous amount of people going to the border, but where I have, their respective applications have been processed, and they've had positive outcomes at the border. So it's definitely nice to see, as even a few months ago that wasn't really happening often, and it's definitely trending in the right direction. So I'm happy to see that.
And that's good to know. But I think it's important to keep in mind the testing and the COVID protocols related to any time somebody tries to flag pull that's entering the United States. So, either get U.S. immigration advice on entry to the United States, or make sure that the person is eligible to enter the United States. Currently, there's no requirement to present a COVID-19 test to cross into the United States by land. For Canadian citizens and permanent residents, there's no requirement to present a COVID-19 test to return to Canada within 72 hours. But they will need a test as a foreign national. So, if somebody wants to attempt to flag pull, foreign nationals must remember that they need to have a COVID-19 test to cross back into Canada. And if they're unvaccinated, then there may be the quarantine period, or there may be denial of entry. So it's important to remember, even though flag pulling is sort of an immigration issue, there are going to be COVID related complications to flag pulling. It's not just a matter of driving to the border and turning around that simply. But it is encouraging that borders are reopening, and they are, again, entertaining flag pulling. And there are certain border crossings within southern Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia that have restrictions on the times that they will entertain flag pulling. So they're only going to be doing immigration services during specific hours and specific days. So anybody that does want to flag pull has to be aware of those restrictions. Otherwise, it may be a case of going down, coming back, and having to do it all over again on another day. Just something to be aware of. But again, an option for people who need to get their status changed immediately. Anything else, Peter?
I think the last, excuse me, I think the last point was just simply, there was an announcement recently from IRCC about there's some slight changes to the post-graduation work permit eligible programs and institutions. It's mostly touching on programs offered in Quebec. So for those listeners who are interested in applying for study permits, or who are already in Canada, those changes may impact you. So I would just recommend you guys review the IRCC updates, or of course, we're happy to answer any specific questions that you may have about your eligibility for the postgraduate work permit.
Speaking of open work permits, the bridging open work permit policy was sort of tweaked quietly, removing the requirement of having a work permit that was expiring within 4 months. So somebody who has a current work permit and also has submitted their permanent residence application and received the acknowledgement letter from IRCC, who's eligible for a bridging open work permit, no longer has to wait 4 months to do their bridging open work permit. So that's good news for people who need to transition from a closed work permit and want to get the flexibility of an open work permit. But I think with that, we are straight out of time. That was a very quick conversation, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so the time that we have for today. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. A special thanks to you, Kelly, and Peter too, for sharing your expert knowledge. If anyone would like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please feel free to reach out and book a consultation. Details can be found on screen right now. I'd also encourage everyone to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media, just to keep up to date with the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.